So the UFC has signed a new $7 billion deal with Paramount. The ESPN era is done. We are going to be getting into the weeds and discussing whether or not this is going to be good for the UFC, the fighters, and of course the fans. Joe Rogan, I think it's time to announce a new award, and that is the Wannabe Hardcore Fan of the Year award because, listen, Joe Rogan has clearly won this award in his most recent podcast. I saw a clip from the podcast where Joe Rogan was talking about the new deal, and he says what may be the most wannabe, try-hard, hardcore fan type of thing to say. And again, we'll get to it, but I mean, it's like really, really bad. We're also going to discuss my frustration with Aaron Pico being pushed by the UFC as the next title challenger. Not a potential guy that could work his way up to a belt someday. We'll see how he does. No. Aaron Pico is being pushed by the UFC as the next title challenger for Volk. Volkanovski may only fight once more in his entire career, and it could be wasted on a meaningless fight that does absolutely nothing for his legacy against Aaron Pico, who doesn't deserve it at all. And I know why he's being pushed. He's an industry plant. And listen, this is not about me not liking Aaron Pico. It's about me not liking how the UFC is trying to fucking push this guy when there are other more deserving contenders for Volkanovski, who, in my opinion, is in need of a big legacy fight. Not someone like Aaron Pico, who's only going to have one fight in the UFC if he fights Volkanovski next after a win against Lerone Murphy, if he beats Lerone Murphy. We're also going to discuss Yuri Prohaska's dinner. Yuri seen loading up on some omega-3 fatty acids, getting some sushi, and we're going to discuss that. And last but not least, we have, for 100 million, which animal could you survive for 20 minutes, dude? I've got a lot to say about that. This might be the dumbest post I've ever seen in my entire life. But let's get into the deal. $7.7 billion over 7 years. About $1.1 billion per year for 7 years. And to put that into perspective, the last deal that the UFC had with ESPN, which was a huge deal. If you don't remember, maybe you weren't a fan at the time, but it was a big deal when the UFC partnered with ESPN. They were making just over $200 million a year for that for 5 years, okay? And overall, for 5 years in total, it was $1.5 billion. This is $1.1 billion per year. So this is massive for the UFC. It goes to show just how valuable the UFC is. It must have been really competitive to try to get the UFC from ESPN, Paramount, Hulu, Netflix, whatever. It must have been very competitive. I mean, listen, Paramount is home to the Champions League. Okay, the Champions League is like the biggest soccer league on the planet, football league on the planet. And I don't think their deal is like this. I don't think their deal is it comes close to this. Maybe I'm wrong. But from what I've seen, it's not even coming close to what the UFC just got. Which means that the UFC, despite not having Conor McGregor, and I think propelled by 2020, when the sports world shut down and Dana White kept the UFC open, the UFC has grown a lot. And there are a ton of hardcore fans. So many hardcore fans. They know they have an enormous base of dedicated followers that are going to tune into every card. And Paramount wants to be the home for the UFC for the next 7 years. They want to make sure that, listen, if you want to watch the UFC, you got to come to us. And the UFC is passing up boxing. I know the boxing, they're getting a lot of big fights these days. But, I mean, listen, the UFC is taking over. And it's still probably the fastest growing sport in the world. So this is big for the UFC. It's great for the UFC. Is it good for the fans, though? Well, it's good for the fans insofar as it's going to be cheaper. Okay? If you were watching every single pay-per-view and getting your ESPN Plus subscription, at least as an American fan, you would be coughing up $1,160. Okay? That's how much it would cost to buy every pay-per-view and also be charged your monthly subscription fee for ESPN Plus. under the new deal, with the way that the UFC is going to go about doing it, they're sort of getting rid of pay-per-views. Now, they're not totally done with pay-per-views forever. Dana White said that they may do some pay-per-views every now and then, depending on how big of a deal an event could be. Maybe if McGregor comes back, for example, maybe a potential White House event, for example. But assuming that most championship fights are not going to be on pay-per-views, it's only going to cost, as opposed to over $1,000, it's going to cost like a tenth of that, $120 if you are a Paramount subscriber. People are saying it's going to be anywhere from $8 to $12 a month. Now, we don't know. Maybe Paramount is going to hike the price to $20. Okay, but essentially the UFC thinks that they can, or Paramount at least, coming together with the UFC, and after all of the stuff that they've talked about, they think that they can make more money by charging your typical monthly subscription price, similar to what you would have to pay for Netflix or Hulu, as opposed to getting people to chalk up $80. It's really a fight to get people to chalk up $80. And it's just such a turnoff to a lot of people that they're not going to be paying a dime. They're just going to go to the stream out east. But they think that because it's only going to be $8 a month to watch 4 events per month, including a big card, a pay-per-view. Now, are they going to be big cards? We'll talk about that. But it's a price that you can sort of be placated with. It's a price that you can sort of not really think about. Okay? You're going to think about, damn, is this really worth $80? But if you're getting 4 UFC events per month for $8 or $12, you're not really going to think about that much. And they could be lulling us into this false sense of security, and they could start giving us mediocre cards. This is why I'm worried. Although it is a lot cheaper, and that's a big win. It's a big win, and maybe the UFC is going to maintain their quality. Maybe it'll get better, although I highly doubt it, because they've just got their bag. They just got their big amount of money. They got over $1 billion per year coming in. Now, maybe they've talked to Paramount, and Paramount is holding them to giving them stacked cards. Hey, you can't skimp out on quality. But again, think about it like this. Even if the UFC starts skimping out on quality and giving us mediocre pay-per-views, putting Waldo Cortez Acosta or Michael Chiesa on a main card, it's a little bit easier to not complain, because at the end of the day, the money that you're being charged doesn't make a dent like $80 would. So when you're talking about, should I buy this pay-per-view for $80? Oh, Waldo Cortez Acosta's on it. Fuck no. If it's $8 a month and, you know, you've already got Netflix, maybe you got Hulu, maybe you got some of these other subscriptions, maybe you watch the Champions League already. Oh, there's a pay-per-view. It's only $8 compared to that $80 back in the day. You're not going to be complaining. You're not going to make a big stink. And maybe this means that there's not going to be as much of an incentive to truly stack the cards. Okay? I mean, a big problem, and this is going to tie into the Joe Rogan thing, a big problem with these Apex events is that essentially, I mean, they're not totally free. In order to watch them, you have to be an ESPN Plus subscriber. So that costs money every month. But if you subscribe to ESPN Plus, you can watch all the Apex events that the UFC has. And those are just excuses for the UFC to run ads all fucking night. And because they've built up such a hardcore fan base, and a large hardcore fan base that'll watch anything, they can just give us shitty fights, run their ads all night, and the people that are watching are not really going to make a big stink out of it, because again, they're not being charged $80. So here with the Paramount deal, especially for pay-per-views now, they're not getting charged anything more than you really would have just buying ESPN Plus and getting a monthly prescription. Are people going to start making a big stink out of the pay-per-views? Dana White can just come out and say, hey man, it's only $8 a month. What the fuck are you on about? And then the next thing you know, the pay-per-views are actually getting worse, right? They're getting a little bit worse, or they're just mediocre. So I'm a little bit worried, because when the UFC is relying on a pay-per-view model, they have an incentive to really stack the cards, because you got to do a lot of work. You have to have big names on a card to get people to want to chalk up a big payment, like $80. So with this money, $8, you don't have to do a lot of work, especially when that $8 doesn't just cover the pay-per-view, or what would be the pay-per-view, essentially the numbered cards. It also covers every other card that month, and there may be 4 of them. So I'm a little bit worried about what this means for the quality of cards. We'll see what happens. Again, maybe Paramount. Again, this is an enormous investment from Paramount. $1 billion a year. So maybe they are going to hold the UFC to putting on good quality products. But as I said, this is the kind of thing where even a mediocre product, people may not make a big stink out of it, because the kind of money, if it truly is only $8 a month, it's the kind of money that people are not going to make a big stink over. So a little bit worried about that. 4 big events per year. Dana White is saying that we might only have 4 big events per year. Now, this could mean that there's going to be 4 events per year on CBS, primetime TV. Primetime TV. You don't even have to flip open the thing and flip open that to get to your streaming service. This sounds like, boomer heaven. Primetime. It better not just be on cable, by the way, because a lot of us don't have cable. But I would imagine that the UFC and Paramount, they're hip enough to understand that if they're going to air it on CBS primetime TV, they should at least have it on their streaming service as well. I hope this doesn't actually mean only 4 stacked cards a year. Now, if it's 4 UFC 300 kinds of cards a year, then that's awesome. But if it's just 4 stacked pay-per-views a year, like 319 is stacked, or Makhachev versus Saryuki and that card in January was stacked, that could be a bit of an issue. But I don't know. Dana White's also saying that pay-per-views aren't completely dead. Again, if McGregor comes back, you know that they're going to have a pay-per-view. So yeah, man, it's good for the fans as far as it's going to be a lot cheaper to be a UFC fan. That's awesome. But again, what does this mean for the quality of the cards? It could mean that they are going to stay the same and they're not so great, which is the problem, or they're going to get slightly worse. Let's get on to Joe Rogan wins Wannabe Hardcore Fan of the Year award. Okay, so I saw Joe Rogan pop up in my algorithm, and he was talking about the new UFC deal. And he has the most pathetic, desperate attempt to be accepted by real hardcore MMA fans. Now, if you've not really been paying attention, Joe Rogan throughout the past maybe 5 years has sort of been slipping a little bit as far as being a hardcore MMA fan. I feel like Rogan was more of a hardcore in the 2010s. But I don't know, man. Joe Rogan is starting to sound like someone that doesn't really watch that much MMA with some of the takes that he's giving.
And you're training for it. You've got this other person who's like training, they're scary as shit, and they're on the other side of the cage, and then you step in, and the two of you are about to go to war. It's the nuttiest job in the history of the world. It really is. Other than war and being a firefighter or a cop, it is the nuttiest job.
I mean, come on, man. The history of the world, I feel like there have been some crazier jobs in the history of the world than being a firefighter or a cop. Yes, being a firefighter is an intense job, 100%. But come on, dude. The history of the world.
You're agreeing to throw bones at each other in front of the world.
Throw bones at each other. Let's hear Rogan say that. Joe Rogan loves saying that. You're going to get in the cage and you're going to throw bones at each other. Yeah, dude, that's gnarly, man. I'm going to throw bones at each other, man.
Millions of people. Yeah. And today, they just announced the UFC just signed some crazy deal with Paramount Plus.
I saw that.
There's going to be no more pay-per-views. All the events are going to be available for everybody for free. Every pay-per-view, every fight card that they have from the Apex, which are my favorite. Every fight card that they have from the Apex, which are my favorite.
From every pay-per-view to the Apex, which are my favorite. Like a little offhand comment. Yeah. So basically, Joe Rogan is trying to signal to all of us that, like, people complain about the Apex all the time, but they're really the best. Because Joe at least is hardcore enough to know that the Apex is kind of unpopular, right? He must be kind of aware enough to understand that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said this shit. If people actually loved the Apex. By the way, I mean, I think we can all agree the Apex fucking sucks because it gives the UFC an excuse to have shitty fight nights so that they can run ads all night. And there's absolutely no real energy in the building. There's like a lack of an environment. There's no crowd. So when you even have crazy fights, when you have barn burner type of fights, you could hear a fucking pin drop in the building. It's a disgrace to the fighters. It's a disgrace to the fans, even the fans at home, the fans that could be watching in person. screaming their lungs out. Imagine some of these fights. Imagine like the Ribovich fight the other week in front of a sold-out arena. And Joe Rogan knows that people are kind of tired of the Apex. So again, he's like kind of tuned in. But this kind of comment is to prove that he's super tuned in.
The Apex, which are my favorite.
Yeah, people complain about the Apex, but it's just more of a hardcore vibe, man. Not fighters that are really out here trying to be flashy or whatnot. Just real hardcore fights, man. There's no environment. It's horrible. Fights suck. Excuse for the UFC to run ads all night, but they're my favorite. Yeah, I'm a real fight fan. I like the Apex cards. Everyone hates them, and they have good reasons too, but they're my favorite. Yeah, they're my favorite. Fuck you, son! Fuck you! He thinks he's so slick with this. He made a conscious effort to slip the Apex in. The Apex events, which are my favorite. It's also just a fucking bullshit lie. They're not your favorite. They're not your favorite. How are they your favorite? Like, why? They're not your favorite because the bigger names are not on the Apex cards. The bigger names are on the big fight nights in Saudi Arabia, in Florida, Orlando, whatever. The big fights are on pay-per-views, not in the Apex. Okay? They've not been in the Apex for a pay-per-view since 2020. What is there to like more about the Apex shows? The environment, the lack thereof? You like hearing the sound of the kicks and the punches? Yeah, that was cool for a couple of months. It was cool for a couple of months, but it's old. It's disgraceful that these sometimes wars are not in front of actual fans going crazy and ballistic. Imagine all of the reactions to the knockdowns and absolute scraps we've seen throughout the past couple of years. And I'm talking about there being some good fights on the Apex cards, but like ultimately the best fighters in the world do not compete on them. My favorite fights to watch are when it's the best versus the best. I want to watch Dricus du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev more than I want to watch any fight that's been on an Apex card this fucking year. Why? Not just because they're bigger names, and that's also a part of it, and you're not a casual for wanting to see big names in a title fight because it brings hype, okay? There's more to wanting to watch a fight other than just the X's and O's. The X's and O's, X's and O's, man. X's and O's, man. We got to calculate. It's more than just the X's and O's, dude. It's about the vibe, the buildup, okay? The talk, debate. So you don't get that at the Apex. And also, the actual fights are between the best fighters in the world, so the X's and O's are covered, and it's actually, like, a lot more interesting. Khamzat Chimaev, best grappler on the planet in MMA versus Dricus du Plessis, toughest, most rootin' tootin', and just, I mean, it's hard to describe. What is he the best at? He's just tough as fuck, and he's just a badass fighter, I guess, man. You get the point. That's more exciting. I want to watch Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. I want to see Makhachev versus Jack Della Maddalena. Those are my favorite fights to watch. But never mind. Yeah, you're right. You're right. The best fights to watch, Joe, the Apex fights. The Apex ones. Sure. Which are my favorite? So the pay-per-views, the White House card, there's going to be the UFC 300 on steroids, and the Apex cards, which are my favorite. Like, come on, dude. You said that to try to get your hardcore points. And it's just pathetic. Like, why are you doing this? This is the equivalent of someone saying, yep, my favorite fighter is Takanori Mominori from 1FC. My favorite fighter is Takanori Gomi. Even though he's retired and he's not competed for years and he got submitted by Sean O'Malley like 5 years ago, he's still my favorite fighter, man. Like, this is the equivalent of your favorite fighter being some fucking coach in a dojo. What, just because you don't fight in the UFC doesn't mean you're not a real fighter? There are other fighters that didn't fight in the UFC or 1FC or Bellator. They're not real fighters? I'm a real hardcore fan. My favorite fighter is someone that's never even fought in any of these big promotions. They've just fought in other shitty promotions. That's my favorite fighter. It'd be one thing if that was your favorite fighter because it was like a good friend of yours or something. A mentor. This is the equivalent to someone saying that some fucking random fighter that fights in Cage Warriors as an old head that used to fight in the amateur leagues in their prime, is their favorite fighter just because they like the style, man. Oh my gosh. This is the equivalent of me saying my favorite fighter of all time, BJ Penn. BJ Penn, man. BJ Penn. And I also didn't even watch him live. Okay? I never saw BJ Penn fight when he was in his prime live. I mean, I saw BJ Penn fight Yair Rodriguez, but I didn't see BJ fight live. That's the equivalent to that. Okay? Favorite fighter, man. That's all. I mean, Joe Rogan, congrats. Congratulations, Joe Rogan! Woo-hoo! We are going to present the Wannabe Hardcore Fan of the Year Award to Joe Rogan. Okay? Now let's get on to some real shit that pisses me off. So I've been watching Alexander Volkanovski's YouTube channel. And Volk has been uploading his predictions for the fights on UFC 319. And he uploaded a prediction for Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico making his UFC debut in what could have been an undeserved number one contenders fight against Evloev. Then that fight fell through. Evloev pulled out, and everyone rejoices because, thank goodness, Evloev is not going to have to fight some totally undeserving, unproven guy in a number one contenders fight. And Pico, the guy that's undeserving and unproven, is not going to be in a number one contenders fight, one fight away from a UFC fucking title, despite having never fought in the UFC to begin with, and not even being a champion in Bellator! Okay? And now, Volkanovski is talking about Pico and Murphy, potentially the winner, being next for him. And I'm not necessarily even going to show you what Volk is saying. Volk is saying, like, in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way, this could be next. I don't want to say too much, but the winner of this could be next. Listen, it's the UFC's decision. Volk is willing to fight anyone. Volk literally called out Evloev. So this is not a rant about Volk. It's just a rant about, like, why the fuck are we in this conversation? I thought we escaped this. Why is Aaron Pico even in a discussion for who's next for a title against Lerone Murphy? Lerone Murphy shouldn't be in talks to fighting for the belt next off of beating someone with no UFC fights. There's Gene Silva, who has a fight with Diego Lopez coming up. There's Movsar Evloev, who has beaten 4 out of the top 5 guys in the division, basically. Arnold Allen, okay? Aljamain Sterling, not 4 out of the top 5 guys, I'm sorry, but he's beaten 4 top 10 ranked featherweights. That's still really impressive. 4 top 10 ranked featherweights. He is going to be ready to go. He pulled out of his fight that was supposed to be in July with an injury. He has August, September, October, the beginning of November to prepare for a Volkanovski title fight. And if it doesn't happen in November, we have December. Why the fuck are people talking about Pico being next? And I guarantee you Volk is alluding to it because the UFC's probably said something to him. And, you know, if you're looking into the weeds, dude, they brought Aaron Pico up at a press conference when they signed him. This is not a Bellator champion. This is not a Bellator legend. This is a guy with a fucking suit. This is literally just Michael Chandler 2.0. That's what they like about Aaron Pico. He has the same kind of vibe to Michael Chandler. Let me just say this. I like Aaron Pico, and I think he has an entertaining style, okay? Seems like a cool guy. I'm just saying, he's very Michael Chandler-like. Super professional, company man. Wears a suit. Chandler didn't wear a suit, but they like Pico because he wears a suit. And if you don't know, Pico's been wearing these, suits for the past 10 years. He's a suit guy. And what does that mean? It means that he reminds them of Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor. Chandler, the biggest company man in the history of company men, that'd be willing to take a dive in a fucking McGregor fight, I guarantee it. And McGregor, who, if you remind them of McGregor at all, if you're just O'Malley, with a hairstyle, a crazy hairstyle, and you go like this with 70s glasses, you do that, and you knock people out, the UFC thinks you're like McGregor, you're the new golden goose for the UFC, right? You're their new guy. Aaron Pico is the Chandler vibe with the McGregor. I'm telling you, it's this simple. He has the same fucking build as Conor, and he has the same style in wearing suits. And because he looks like McGregor with his suits, and he's a professional company man, that's enough for the UFC to want to fast track this guy into an undeserved number one contenders fight against Lerone Murphy, who shouldn't even be fighting in a number one contenders fight to begin with, man. Movsar Evloev should be next. Okay? And I know there's going to be an argument, well, if he beats Lerone, doesn't that prove something? The point is, Volk may only fight once or twice more for the rest of his fucking career. There's a lot on the line. Okay? It makes a big difference if Volkanovski beats someone like Evloev, who has 4 ranked wins, who has wins over former champion Aljamain Sterling, staple in the top 15, Dan Ige, staple in the top 10, Arnold Allen. He's got a lot of wins. A win over Diego Lopez, who went on a tear and fought for the belt and came up short. That is a meaningful win. That's a legacy win. And it's also just a sick fight for Volk because it's like, here's another Dagestani wrestler. Let's see if you can get it back after losing to Islam. Let's see if you can right the wrong. Can you beat this style again? I know that he's got a bit of a different style, but it's Volk versus the brother wrestler. We all want to see that. We want to see Volk versus the Khabib-like style. We want to see, dude, he did so well against Makhachev. It's a shame that the last time he fought that style, he was not prepared. I want to see prepared Volk versus a smaller version of Islam Makhachev because I think he destroys him. Or it's just still a tough matchup. And maybe Evloev wins. And the point is, Evloev is fucking deserving. I'm not talking about this because I'm worried about Pico beating Volk. I don't really give a fuck at this point. I don't want Volk beating Pico and having people say, yeah, but he beat Pico. Who gives a fuck? Like, look at some of these other champs. Once they've gotten to the point of Volk, forget champs. Look at Dustin Poirier when he got to the big star status. Dustin Poirier wasn't fighting Aaron Picos. He was fighting Aaron Picos when Pico got a couple of wins under his belt. You could say, well, he fought Chandler. He fought Chandler after Chandler beat Tony. It was in the cage with Hooker and was in the cage with Oliveira and was in the cage with Gagey. He fought Chandler after Chandler had established himself and had 4 fights under his belt and had proven himself as a big star when it comes to being entertaining. What is Charles Oliveira's worst title win? Michael Chandler. Why? Because Chandler only had 1 win under his belt before that. And Michael Chandler, outside of that win, really hasn't done that much. That's Charles Oliveira's worst title win. Okay? Like, listen, man, I don't want to look at Volk's record and see, oh, he beat Pico. What has Pico done in his career? Absolutely fucking nothing. He beat Lerone Murphy and no one else. I mean, yeah, that's something. If you beat Lerone Murphy, that's something. But again, we don't have many opportunities to see a legend like Volk get in the cage again. But again, I still want to harp on what I was saying about the Poirier thing. I feel like Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, they get bigger fights than this. Even a Rafael Fiziev is a bigger fight, right? Max Holloway, he's fighting Justin Gaethje, he's fighting Dustin Poirier, he's fighting the Korean Zombie in Korean Zombie's retirement fight. Like, Volk is fighting these. Diego Lopez, I guess he had some hype for sure, but Aaron Pico, Volk, the big legend, only a couple more fights left in his career probably. He could fight Evloev, a sick fight that we all want, and this is the guy that the UFC is pushing just because he has a company man Chandler vibe and he wears a suit. This is so fucking forced. It's so forced. It's the same thing with O'Malley, but even worse. Because at least O'Malley had actually given us some sick performances. At least O'Malley gave Jan a really close fight. And it was Jan, former champ at the time, not Lerone Murphy, by the way. So if Pico does well, don't relate him to O'Malley, okay, having a close fight with Jan. O'Malley lost. The point that I wanted to make is that the UFC was rushing O'Malley because of his style, of the way he looked. Of course, the fight style is part of it, and Aaron Pico's got a good fight style, but let's be honest, if Aaron Pico wasn't rocking these suits, he wouldn't be getting this position. And, good on Aaron Pico. He's doing really well for himself, and he's moving really intelligently with his career, and he's representing himself really well. I'm just saying, as a fan of the sport, I want to see Volk fight the guys that are most deserving. I would rather see Volk fight Gene Silva. And I think Gene Silva beats Volk. I would rather see Volk fight Gene Silva. Okay? So this is not about, I'm afraid Pico's going to win. As I said, Volk probably could beat Aaron Pico. I don't want to see him get a win that's going to easily be discredited, man. So, again, this is all just happening out of nowhere. We're talking about Evlev. We're talking about we'll see what happens with Gene Silva and Diego Lopez. And then the UFC is sneaking in. Pico, think about Pico. Hey, man, don't forget about Pico. You're going to hear all of the UFC brass up on the ESPN MMA desk. By the way, I hope they don't get rid of ESPN MMA coverage at least, but they might. But either way, you're going to hear, I don't know who's covering. Does anyone really watch the UFC's little 5-minute breakdown that they do with the ESPN guys on Fight Week? On Fight Week, I'm talking about. Dean Thomas is one of those guys. Either way, they're going to be saying, and Pico wins, he's going to get a title shot. It's just pathetic. It's pathetic. And you should never be fighting for a UFC title with only one win in the UFC. Period. Unless you are a long reigning champ in another promotion with tons of hype. If Aaron Pico was champ for the past 4 years and had a ton of hype, and the UFC was getting worried about Bellator becoming competitive because how much of a phenom Aaron Pico is and how he's leading Bellator, into being competitive with the UFC, then I would be all right, if he gets one win in the UFC, I'm down. That's not the case. He has less hype than Michael Chandler had coming in. But here they are ringing the bells of title shot for Pico, title shot for Pico. I'm just fucking sick of it, dude. For $100 million, which animal could survive against? Okay, so I mean, this has to be rage bait, right? Which animal could you survive against for 20 minutes? Is this assuming that people? Yeah, I mean, again, most people could survive at least 3, but 20, dude. What about 20 minutes against a tiger lunging at you for 20 minutes? So first off, I think this is rage bait, but obviously the right answer is the hippo. The hippo is an easy animal. I broke this down on my How to Defeat Animals video. The hippo is an easier animal to trick because all they have is the big open and close. And unlike tigers, bears, and lions, I could have just said lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, but unlike the other trio, they have claws, they have paws, and they can paw at you, they can swipe you. Hippos have these little, stubby tree stumps for limbs, and they have no ability to swipe at you. So you really just have to avoid the big open close. And if you think about it, if tigers didn't have these enormous paws, right? If bears didn't have these huge claws, man, they would be less scary because all you have to do is avoid the big open close. So obviously the right answer is a hippo. You just try to run. You literally just try to run towards its tail at all times. It's going to be circling. Just run towards its tail. And if you have decent stamina, you're going to be able to do it. But, I mean, come on, dude. You're probably not surviving against any of these animals. Because you think you're going to fucking... All it takes is you to trip once. That hippo's literally just chomping off your leg with one bite.